Welcome back to Coffee Corner Motorsport, Full Beans the podcast. This is Formula One Espresso News. I'm Terry, and we've got only one subject this week. That's right, we've got an whole episode on Alpine and the mess that they're currently in, after what has been quite a traumatic 48 hours if you're an Alpine fan. So, if you want to know what is going on down at ENSTONE, grab your coffee, sit down, strap in, and let's give it some full beans. Right, we can only talk about Alpine. I tried to think about whether or not I do lots of little videos, lots of sort of talk about this, but there's so much to cover. I thought the best way is, imagine if you had a podcast. So here we are. We are going to be discussing Alpine and all of the goings on from this week. So if that takes your fancy, do me a quick favour. Before we get into it, hit that like, follow, subscribe button, whatever is available to you on the platform you're listening to. Because like I said, I bring you all the latest from the paddock to the podcast via the shed. And we are going to kick off with this Alpine just hot mess that dropped late on Tuesday night. Now, Miami kind of came and went. It was a similar performance to what we've experienced from Alpine throughout the course of the season. Then we started hearing very strong rumblings that Jack Doohan was about to be replaced by Franco Colapinto. Now, if you've listened to last week's podcast, one, a massive thank you for being one of the people who's tuned in. And two, secondly, that swap wouldn't actually come much of a surprise because we discussed it on the podcast. So that kind of part of the Alpine announcement wasn't a shock. However, the email that landed into my inbox on late Tuesday night was a shock, which was that Oliver Oates had resigned as team principal of Alpine. Now, this obviously wasn't planned. It was late at night. It was a very short communication. It obviously wasn't a planned communication from Alpine to drop at that time. It's clearly been either found out by somebody and they're back to the press with it, or Alpine needed to do it before the next sequence of moves, which they were to announce obviously yesterday, which is obviously Wednesday for all of those who listen to podcasts. That set of announcements had to have been done in certain order for it to sort of be done. Now, with regards to what's happening, so we got that message that Oliver Oates had resigned as team principal of Alpine, very short, very sweet, and that in the interim, Flavio Briatore would be stepping in as, almost like an acting team principal. He's still the special advisor, but he would be taking on the role and responsibilities of Oliver Oates. Now, with regards to what that means, now there's been a lot of speculation this is all to do with this driver announcement. I don't think it is personally. I think it would be very sort of not foolish of Oliver Oates. I just don't think that he would be petulant enough, I suppose is probably the word. I'm looking forward to throw his toys at the pram over a driver announcement when it's the second driver. It's still got Pierre Gasly. We know what's coming on. We're going to touch on that later on in the podcast when we look to the future for Alpine. But I wonder if this is more to do with the sale to High Tech going south than a driver announcement. Now, we all know that Andretti was originally lined up. That obviously went to pot. As we know, they've now been, sort of morphed into the Cadillac version, and that's coming in, so obviously that's no longer an option. We know that Alpine are setting themselves up for a sale. That's what Flavio Briatore is there to do. That's what the Renault board have instructed him to do. We know that that's said to be towards the end of 2026, so there's another season and a half. We know he started off with all of the cost-saving measures he put in place, with shutting down the engine facilities, and all of the other various things that Flavio Briatore has been brought in to do, makes you think that they've been levelled up for a sale. Now, High Tech seemed a really good bid for someone to take over Alpine. They obviously had a Formula 1 bid that was turned down from the FIA and from Formula 1 themselves. They're obviously in the process of legal proceedings against the FIA because of that failed bid. And by appointing Oliver Oates into it, it would allow him to see what on earth's going on before, of course, he then tabled a bid to buy Alpine with that inside knowledge that he's obviously got from being a team principal. It all lined up perfectly. So for me, that makes you think that something's happened there. Now, either that's something to do with the compensation payment from the FIA, or whether or not that's something to do with actually what's going on in terms of High Tech as a business, or whether or not it's a disagreement that Alpine are asking for too much. Whatever that looks like, ultimately, it now feels like that deal is also dead off the water, which is going to send Alpine back to the drawing board. And also, on the flip side of it, might also explain what's going on with Oliver Oates, because ultimately, when you're someone in his position, it doesn't make sense for him to resign over Jack Doohan. Now, Alpine were very quick on Wednesday to put out a raft of statements to say that actually Oliver Oates' resignation is absolutely nothing to do with the driver decision. So if you're watching on YouTube, you've got it on screen, but in case you're listening on a podcast, we've got the Flavio Briatore one in front of us, in which Flavio Briatore says, "A lot has been said in the past 24 hours incorrectly associating the decision of Ollie resigning to alleged disagreement or that we shared different views. This is completely false and far from the truth. Me and Ollie have a very good relationship and had long-term ambitions to drive this team forward together. We respect Ollie's decision to resign and have therefore accepted his resignation. The reasons are not related to the team and are of a personal nature. I will continue to be more and more involved with the team together with the strong management we already have in place. We will work hard on improving our position this season and preparing for 2026. Included to this is a message to Ollie for the whole team. So let's have a look at the Oliver Oakes message. So Oliver Oakes' statement said, "It's been a privilege to lead everyone at ENSTONE. What a team, what a place. It's a personal decision for me to step down. Flavio has been like a father to me, nothing but supportive since I took the role, as well as giving me the opportunity is in place for 2026 and where this dream deserves to be. I believe in ENSTONE." So you can see we very much got this sort of notion now that there's some personal reasons behind Oliver Oakes resigning. I truly hope there is nothing actually wrong in terms of health or anyone associated with Oliver in terms of suffering from their health. I genuinely hope that's not the case. Anybody who no one wants to see that from anybody within the sport. So on a genuine note here, I do really hope that everything's okay for Oliver Oakes in a personal capacity. And likewise, it's not for us to pry into that. We can only go with what we've got. So at face value, you would say that makes sense. However, the timing of it doesn't, does it? I mean, ultimately, it doesn't all stack up as just being a personal decision to just step down. Why go through the Miami, go through everything he's been through to just leave? That doesn't make any sense to me. Like I say, I think this is more linked to the high-tech deal. I think this is a disagreement along with Flavio over obviously where the company's going, where the team's going, what the future looks like, what they expect him to be. Oliver has been the fall guy for a lot of Flavio's decisions, you got to remember. So whilst Flavio has been making these decisions in the background, it's been Oliver who's had to come out and face the press over a lot of decisions that ultimately weren't his to make, and probably ones that he maybe didn't agree with. So you've got a team principal coming out facing the firing squad over decisions that weren't his to make in the first place, and therefore that's also going to set you up for a bad relationship, no matter how good on paper you say this relationship is. If you don't agree with those decisions, yet you're the one having to justify those decisions, then actually that's wrong on every level, isn't it? So for me, I think this is more to do with High-Tech's failed bid for Alpine. Or on the plus side, it could be that actually they're about to take over Alpine, and the reason he's gone is because actually that's the reason why they're about to take over, and he needed to step back for that reason. But for me, I think it's the previous one. I think that the bid failed, and in return for that, Oliver Oakes has paid the price for that, because ultimately, if you're not buying the team, they don't want him there as team principal, because that's what they intended to bring him in for in the first place. Like I said, hope everything's right. What does it mean? Of course, it means the return of Flavio Briatore in charge. Now, I must stress, Flavio isn't in as a team principal. Flavio is keeping his advisor role. They haven't confirmed whether or not they're actively looking. They haven't confirmed whether or not it's a short-term thing, just that he will take on more of the responsibilities from Oliver Oakes. Now, this is controversial. This is a really controversial decision by Alpine and the Renault board especially. And you've got to go all the way back, because it's a controversial decision to have Flavio Briatore back in Formula 1 full stop. Now, to have him actively running the team, yes, I know he was running it when he came back as a special advisor. Let's not beat around the bush here and pretend that he wasn't. But ultimately, with regards to Flavio Briatore being in Formula 1, it is a very controversial one. So let's just have a look at some of the key stages in Flavio Briatore's Formula 1 career. So 1988 to 1997, he was, of course, in charge of Benetton. He'd been brought in from the fashion industry to drive that Benetton team, that new team, onto the Formula 1 grid. Now, he joined in 1988 as a commercial director. He was then promoted to team principal in 1990. Then, of course, he oversaw that massive success that they had with Michael Schumacher winning championships, obviously both in 1994 and 1995, before leaving Benetton in 1997. Then, back in 2000, he came back to Renault, so that was 2000 to 2009, where Briatore returned to Formula 1 as the managing director of Renault in 2000. He signed Fernando Alonso and helped him win the championships, obviously in 2005 and 2006. And then, of course, was the big scandal. He was involved in Crashgate in 2008, which then led to a lifetime ban from Formula 1. So that's where it is. So from 2009 to 2024, Flavio Briatore stayed out of Formula 1 for several years after the ban. However, he was spotted in the paddock later on in that time, because in 2010, the Tribunal de Grande, they overturned that ban and granted him €15,000 in compensation. So this is where the confusion over a lot of probably the newer fans in Formula One actually don't quite understand what happened. Flavio, by all intents and purposes, was found guilty of the Crashgate scandal. Him, along with Pat Simmons, was banned from Formula One, and they were told that they couldn't even enter the paddock. That was then deemed to be unlawful by the French courts, and it was overturned, like I said, back in 2010. That led to this gradual thing where Flavio kept his connections all the time and ultimately found his way back to the paddock via a lot of commercial dealings he had. Before he started back with Alpine back in 2024, he'd set up his hospitality sort of business where he teamed up with Formula One and got into it that way. We know he's got massive friendships with the likes of Lawrence Stroll, Stefan Domenicali, Toto Wolff. Flavio never got rid of those. He managed drivers in the meantime as well, so he kept an influence. That obviously kept him talking to people in the paddock. It kept him involved in Formula One. Rightly or wrongly, by the way, this is just what happened. And so before people come at me like I'm defending him, I'm not. I'm just putting the facts out there. That kept him involved in Formula One, which ultimately kept his contacts. He kept his relationship with the Renault board. And then ultimately, in 2024, he returned as an executive advisor to Alpine. So he's been advising Alpine on various aspects of the team, including driver market insights and strategic matters. And he's also involved in evaluating drivers and ensuring the team has the best lineup in 2026. Now, this goes back to very much the sort of original Red Bull setup that they had. Red Bull had a very similar setup when they first come on board, with Dietrich and, of course, Helmut Marko doing this role of Flavio Briatore. With Christian Horner very much the team principal, the forward-facing person, like Oliver Oates was doing. It's a very similar actual setup to what Red Bull worked with in those early days. Obviously, it's changed dramatically now as Christian's influence has got more and Helmut Marko's is decreased, and obviously since Dietrich's passed away. But the idea was very similar and probably was born out of this sort of setup that was there. And for that, you've then got someone who's in charge of strategic decisions, driver lineups, contracts, doing all of those things, allowing the team principal to just literally manage the team and just drive as such and deliver the car. So Flavio's role has been that since he's come back on board. He's been brought in to be, almost the person who takes the fall for the Renault board. The Renault board see Flavio as a perfect fool guy for everything. He's quite happy to be painted as a villain, to be painted as a bad guy. He don't mind the fact they're picket lining about, pulling out a Formula One engine. He's not really bothered at all by that. So the Renault board are quite happy for that because it allows him to take all the flack. I mean, the interesting thing from the Alpine mess this week is no one is talking about the Renault board, which ultimately the Renault boards are the ones who pull the strings at Alpine. And it's all about Flavio, isn't it? Now, the Renault board want that. That's what they brought him in for. He's a great fool guy. He's a villain. He don't mind playing the role as long as he gets his paycheck at the end of it. That is perfect for Renault. That's what they want. So Flavio's doing this role now. That was one decision to pull out of the engine deal because basically they didn't think they had a good enough engine and they saw it as a waste of money. The other side to that coin is, of course, it's a lot harder to sell a Formula One team when you've got to sell the engine part of it as well. A lot of people coming into Formula One don't, unless you're a big engine manufacturer, you don't want to be an engine manufacturer. You want to be just a chassis, just a team, similar to Haas or somebody coming in. You don't want to be producing and making engines unless, of course, you're a massive car company who want to do that. Anybody who's an investment fund coming into Formula One want to do it as a business, and therefore they don't want the engine side of it and all of the money and the hassle that goes with that. So streamlining it makes perfect sense. Paying off the mortgage at ENSTONE makes perfect sense because when you sell it, you purely get the profit for it. All of these things are completely in line with an Alpine sale. There is a massive amount of speculation that, like I said earlier, Flavio Briatore is on a bonus, which means that once they hit a certain value and at the end of 2026, if Alpine is sold, he gets a massive part of that bonus and that money from the sale of that one. So all of this still points towards that. Now, with regards to, obviously, driver lineups and what's going on, we've got Jack Doohan, who's, for me, the real loser in all of this, because I've got on screen, I've got Doohan's race results and I've got Gaz's race results for this season. Now, Jack Doohan has got a DNF in Australia, P13 in China, P15 in Japan, P14 in Bahrain, P17 in Saudi Arabia, and obviously a DNF last time out. Now, you compare that to Pierre Gasly, who's got P11 in Australia, P11 in China, P13 in Japan, P7 in Bahrain, where he finished in points, a DNF in Saudi, and P13 in Miami. Jack obviously out-qualified Pierre in the last race out. So when you look on paper, if we're evaluating driver performances, actually Jack Doohan isn't as far away from Pierre Gasly as what some media outlets are actually making out. He's not a million miles away. Bar the exception of Bahrain, where Pierre finished in points, actually, they've not been that dissimilar. P13 in China, P11 for Pierre. You've then got P15 in Japan. You've got P13 for Pierre. So, actually, is it as bad as we make out? Has Jack done poorly? And Jack's been under some massive scrutiny from the start of the season. He's been under some intense scrutiny right from the very off. We all know that Franco has been waiting for this chance. We all know that that's why Franco's been brought in. And Jack's had to deal with that. We've heard from Kim Illman saying about how Jack's been having death threats recently from Franco Colapinto fans, which, by the way, is completely unacceptable and needs to be rooted out and needs to be found out who these people actually are and, some way holding them to account for that. Because that is, no matter how passionate you are about a driver, no matter how passionate you are about wanting to see your favourite driver on the grid, wishing ill of somebody, to get their place. Come on. Come on. Are we really doing this in Formula One? I mean, that's shocking behaviour, isn't it? Absolutely shocking behaviour. Let people be on Formula One. We know people get into Formula One on commercial benefits. We're going to come on to that in a minute. But don't be wishing ill of people to get your favourite driver in. Come on. We're better than that. We're much better than that. But anyway, mini rant over on that. But so Jack's had this massive pressure all season long. He's dealt with it. However, the past couple of races, he looks like he's unravelled a bit, if I'm honest. And that would make sense if he's getting personal threats against his life. Of course it would. That would unravel anybody, especially a rookie. So actually, can you blame him for that? And should Alpine have done enough for that one? Done more with that one? Is probably the big question on that one. But for me, you've got all of these things going on, all of these factors going into it. And, where do we stand with it? Where is this sort of thing that we've got? Now, we've got, obviously, the future for Alpine. They are looking towards 2026. Flavio's alluded to that. Franco's come in. He's got 5 races. Now, why has Franco got 5 races? It's because of money, ultimately. And the whole reason that Franco's in here is because of marketing. And I don't mean that as a negative slur on his driving ability before, I get the Jack Doohan sort of threats levelled against me. Franco is in that car because he brings great commercial power to Alpine. Now it's up to Franco to deliver. Don't get me wrong. Would you compare his time at Williams as a success? I'd say early doors it was, but towards the end there was a lot of crashes and there's a lot of doubts over whether or not Franco could actually deliver on a permanent basis. That's one of the reasons why Red Bull didn't go with Franco. So that's just a fact. Let's throw that one out there. He has had some crashes. He has cost he's cost Williams a lot of money as well, but he's also offset that with the amount of money he brings in. There's talk of it's about 20 million euros or something stupid like that Franco brings in, but only if he's in the car. Alpine obviously wants some of that money, so that's why they've done it. They said 5 races because I'm sure they're trying to eat the money out of whoever's coming in. I'm sure they want to sort of get every last penny out of this deal that they've got. It's a loan deal, stroke long-term multi-year deal, and we're still not quite sure of it. We're hearing it's sort of 3-4 years and then potentially he goes back to Williams and then they've had to pay a fee for it. That fee will go up based on appearances and other bits on that. So it's a bit of a weird deal that Franco's on that no one kind of knows how it's worked out. It might be that he has to be in the car for a set amount of races, hence why it's only 5. To guarantee that money from the sponsors. That could be a reason behind it. We know these contracts are very complicated. We know they're very sort of, bent into what detail goes into them. So it could well just be that. Do I think they're going to swap Franco? Unless he has a complete mare, I don't think they will because of the money coming in. And also, bear in mind, you can only use 4 permanent drivers in a Formula 1 season. And, Franco will be their 3rd. Paul Aaron is, of course, their other reserve. Rio has now gone on to Haas. He comes from high tech, so it'd be interesting to see what they do with him in terms of his reserve role. We know that Jack swapped into that reserve role back. Obviously, if you bring Jack back into the car, then that doesn't count as a driver change in terms of the FIA because you already raced for Alpine this season. So yes, there is an option, I suppose, to do that. Will this allow Jack some time to regroup, get some more sponsor money in, maybe stand the case for himself? If Franco doesn't do well, will there be a clamour to bring Jack back? I don't know. I personally think that this is probably the end of Jack with Alpine as a driver, to be brutally honest. I can't see it changing after 5 races, but this is Flavio Briatore. He is ruthless. He will win at all costs, as proven with what's happened in the past. So I wouldn't rule anything out of that at all. I wouldn't sit here and say 100% that's not going to happen, because ultimately it could well happen. With regards to the future, yeah, we know Mercedes are coming on board with an engine in 2026. We know that Pierre Gasly is extremely excited about this. If you go back to Pierre Gasly's podcast that he's done recently, you'll hear him talk quite highly about Flavio Briatore. Flavio Briatore talks very highly about Pierre Gasly. Pierre is very excited about the Mercedes engine coming, especially all of the talk about how dominant this engine is. I do think they're looking for a partner to go with Pierre for 2026. So I do think there is an element of evaluating their drivers that is truthful. They expect to be in the mix. Flavio has said that he expects them to be back in the mix for 2026 in terms of, performances, podiums, wins, that sort of things, by having that Mercedes engine. That was the whole point of him negotiating with Mercedes and getting that engine so that actually Alpine would be competitive again. So he's looking for a partner for Pierre to spearhead this new look Alpine for 2020. Like I said, based very much on the back of he gets a massively fat bonus at the end of it if they're doing so well in the championship and the value of the team and then selling the team. So it's all a vested interest, don't get me wrong, but it is an interest nevertheless, and that's what he's looking for. They're looking for that Pierre Gasly partner for when Mercedes come on board. There is, of course, lots of other names being chucked in the frame. There's talks of they've spoken to Checo to find out what's going on with his situation, and obviously Cadillac. You've got drivers like Bottas who are still available, obviously. You've also got drivers who may be looking for a move. You've got George Russell. Imagine if Max makes that move, then actually you've potentially got George Russell on the market. George Russell, Pierre Gasly would work for Flavio Briatore. Flavio's got close ties to both Toto and to George. It wouldn't be, it certainly wouldn't be a shock if that happened, if Mercedes were to try and get Max from Red Bull and actually succeeded. So I can see that one happening. So I think any driver coming in that second seat is always going to be on a short-term deal because of that. Flavio wants to keep his options open. He wants to make it so that actually those options are open and available to go and get somebody else if that driver becomes available. So I think that, with Checo, it could just be that he's been speaking to Carlos Slim, who's obviously Checo's backer, about getting more money for Franco, because we know that Carlos Slim is starting to heavily back into Franco. We're seeing a lot of the sponsors that Checo had starting to emerge on the grids. Gabriel Bortoletti has got a Kit Kat agreement, for example. So we are seeing some of that money from South America starting to be divvied out to more drivers as they enter Formula One. So with that in mind, it could just be that Flavio is talking more to Carlos Slim for the money rather than talking to Carlos Slim for Checo. So don't rule that out either. But for me, I think that Pierre Gasly is a lock-in for 2026. I think that second seat is going to be who's available. I think that Franco's got an opportunity now, don't get me wrong, but I think that also someone like George, if he become available, I mean, Ralf Schumacher has talked about Max Verstappen going there. I can't see it myself because I can't see that Max would want any part of this Alpine mess. Certainly from the outside coming in, but you never know with Flavio Briatore, with those Jos Verstappen, Benetton links and all sorts of things. It wouldn't be against the round bit. We know that Carlos Sainz was almost swayed by Flavio Briatore back in Barcelona last year, so he's clearly good at putting a case forward. Whatever you may think of Flavio Briatore in terms of him as a person, in terms of winning in Formula One, it's something he does at any cost, and that actually drivers can see the benefit of that, and there's clearly a set of drivers who are willing to look past all of the other stuff that goes with working for Flavio Briatore in exchange for a car that could potentially win you races and win you the championship, which is what I think Pierre's currently doing. Rightly or wrongly, that's obviously them looking out for themselves and their own personal choice to do so. Mine, like I've said on here, it's a tough one. I was around when Crashgate happened. I don't believe that someone should be allowed back into the sport after admitting that happened. To be honest, it is blatant cheating in the most simplest of form. I don't see anything else in terms of how you describe it. It was clearly cheating. It's been admitted that it was cheating, and therefore that should carry a ban, no matter what the French courts agreed. And that I think that the FIA should have done more to make sure that ban's upheld, and Formula One themselves should have insisted on it. We're in a world now where modern day media and teams and drivers and policies and ethics and all of these things are under so much scrutiny that actually we've allowed for Flavio Briatore to come back into Formula One almost as a team principal for Alpine. And I think that needs looking at by the people in charge of Formula One and the FIA to make sure that actually we put some things in place to make sure that don't happen again. Because whatever your personal view on Flavio Briatore is, someone who was found guilty of cheating within the sport is now running one of those elite teams in Formula 1. And that to me just doesn't sit right at all. But in terms of Flavio getting results, that's what Flavio does. And Flavio will get you results, and he will get Alpine back to the top of the grid, I feel, by any means necessary, which, like I said, appeals to some people. And certainly, if nothing else, it appeals to the Renault board, doesn't it? Yeah, that's my sort of 25, 30 minutes on Alpine. It's a bit all over the place because Alpine's a bit all over the place, so it probably resembles the team at the moment. Looking to the future, what can I see? I can see Franco under pressure to deliver. Yeah, looks like he's got a free ride at the moment in terms of his future with the team and what he brings. They see him as an asset, so that's good. I think he's playing the game with Flavio Briatore and keep it on the right side of him. I don't blame him for that. You don't want to be on the wrong side of Flavio Briatore. Interestingly, that he is Jack Doohan's manager, which is probably why Jack's been put down into that reserve role. I'm sure the compensation financially is fine as well. Not that will please Jack in any way whatsoever, but I'm sure that that's what's happened. I think financially he's fine because ultimately Flavio's had to negotiate Jack's release with himself. So yeah, from me, that's all I've got for you this week. Like I said, I'll be back next week as normal. We've obviously got to build it to Imola next week, so I'll have a bit of a preview on that one. Once again, appreciate you all checking in. If you can, just do me a favour, hit that follow, like, subscribe button and get these numbers up. We're up to 100,000 views on YouTube, which is absolutely monumental. So really appreciate anyone who's stopped by the YouTube channel and watched that. We've also got up to about 760 subscribers on there as well. I don't like subscribers. We can call them followers. We've just hit 13,000 followers on Instagram. We're almost at 7,000 on Facebook, and we're almost at 24,000 on TikTok. So the coffee corner is growing, and I appreciate all of you for being here for that. So without a shadow of a doubt, I'm going to grab my coffee, take a swig of it, and sit back and watch this Alpine mess unfold, and I'll catch you all next week. Have a good one.